everyone, and welcome to this last in the series, the persona series that we're doing at inspir'em, where we're talking to different CXOs about some of the challenges that they're facing today. My name's Emma Maslen and I'm the CEO of inspir'em, and today I'm joined by the delightful Emma Clayton. So we're going to have a couple of Emmas on here today talking about marketing and the role of a CMO. So welcome, Emma. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Real pleasure. Yeah, glad to be here.
Great, thanks very much. So just a couple of reminders about the series just to get started, and then we'll get into Emma's background and go through some questions. So this is the last in the series that we have around the persona series. So you can find the resources on our platform, information about CIOs, CEOs, CHROs, CFOs, CROs and CMOs. Particularly interesting highlights from the series that we've done. We were just discussing that the CFO from Redgate, Stephen Mitchell, talked to us just shortly after the budget. Very interesting for anybody that's selling into the C-suite to understand what the CFO's up to. And also CHRO as well, Deborah Rogers talked to us about the impact of AI and productivity-based business cases. So again, very useful for enterprise salespeople. In the January series that we're going to be running, specifically, we're going to be talking about pipeline generation and how do you build out your plan for the year. So that series will be starting on the 10th of January and that'll be running through till March. And that will be at the same time every week on a Friday at great request from people in the US as well. It'll be on a Friday afternoon at 2 p.m. UK time. That'll be 9 a.m. Eastern. So hopefully you can join us then. If you'd like some information about that, then drop us an email at customersupport@inspir'em.coach. So on to today's webinar then. So joined by the lovely Emma. So Emma, just to kick us off then, it'd be great to just hear a little bit about your background, some of the roles that you've held, and just some of maybe the highlights of your career so far.
Yeah, so hi everybody. So I'm Emma Clayton and I am currently a fractional CMO and a consultant, go-to-market and launch consultant. And I have spent, I think it's now about 23, 24 years. I started in sales and then decided that marketing didn't know what they were doing, qualified and started to say, this is the strategy. So I've always had that strategic focus about, well, what are we trying to do here in the business? And then qualified and all the way through, worked my way up from product manager, brand manager, marketing manager, go-to-market, and then up to CMO. And I left my corporate career about 7 or 8 years ago to do more consulting work. And that's been around specifically go-to-market, fixing broken marketing, and I suppose championing the cause for the standardization and the skill uplift within marketing. That seems to be sort of in the digital area, dissipating and diluting. Some of the roles that I've held have been Chief Client Experience Officer in PwC. I was part of the leadership team that took Stability AI into its next round, the Series A 180 mil funding there, so that they are now this big Hollywood AI creation company. And I've been in loads of different pharmaceutical companies, and I actually put the go-to-market plan for Ozempic together before I left and became a consultant. So lots of variation, but with a theme around improving marketing.
That's great. Thanks very much. And so to kick off then, the way that we've been running this series is to talk a little bit, first of all, about the structure of marketing and some of the job titles of the people that are sort of involved in the marketing world. Because if you imagine our salespeople are trying to get into marketing, understand marketing, but also sometimes the job titles can be a little bit funky. So it's difficult to work out who works for who in when we're looking around LinkedIn. So it'd be great to get a little bit of an understanding from yourself around how do you view marketing? What are some of those key departments within marketing and some of those key job titles?
Gosh, that is such a big question because marketing is just a beast. And I think we've lost our way in marketing. I think the perception of marketing, but also those in marketing, it's really difficult to define. But if I can just go back a step, so I think it depends on the size of the business as to actually what that marketing function looks like. So if you're going into a big enterprise, so if I give you an example of, PwC or Amazon's, whatever, you'll have a chief marketing officer and they tend to sit on the board, majority, less and less so, but they will sit on the board and they will be really owning that strategic direction. How do we as a business set our objectives, our financial objectives? Okay, great. How do we now go and realize that with customers to change hearts and minds and create growth? And underneath them will sit some heads. Heads of brand, head of performance, head of growth, head of PR and comms. So you'll have your discipline. It will sit, and then they'll have their teams, maybe head of product. But actually, where the crisis is really, I think, happening is smaller businesses, SMEs, startups, scale-ups, all the way up to probably like the 100 mil revenue mark, are looking and saying, well, hang on a second, we want the same thing. And so what they'll do is bring somebody in on this chief marketing officer role, who hasn't necessarily held a chief strategic role, because they want them to do social media, performance marketing, go to market, very tactical. And what we're seeing is that these roles are not performing at what you would expect a chief marketing officer to do, because that strategic connection that a CMO would traditionally do, they'd hook in the business direction with actually what are we going to do, is missing. So what you get is a business that wants to go here and a hell of a load of spray and pray tactics that don't connect to actually realize anything. And we see this churn of these marketeers in and out. And I think that CMOs have got the lowest tenure in any business at the minute. They're in, they're out, because they're not performing. And I think that, whilst the roles are changing, I think that that's the piece that, really is disconnected through businesses. It's a difficult one to answer, but traditionally that is what a chief marketing officer should be doing.
And just on that then, so performance marketing that you mentioned there, because that's when we're mapping out with some of our clients the types of job roles that we would talk to, brand awareness, that, is a very typical role, social media, a very typical role. But the performance marketing, what specifically, let's just talk about that for a second. So what is performance marketing? And what's the CMO looking to get out of that? How do they measure the success of performance-based marketing?
So everybody, again, I'm in a CMO network, there's like 250 of us, and only this week were we deliberating, what do we actually mean by performance marketing, and what's the difference between that and growth marketing? I personally think that they are real top of the funnel awareness. How do we go out and attract people into the funnel? How do we get those metrics? And performance marketing is it's really about data. How are we doing in terms of our acquisition? How are we getting them? What are the channels? What's the growth? What's the engagement? And it's real numbers, performance metric. What those guys are really struggling to do is demonstrate how they are really bringing some brand loyalty to the argument. And so there's a big argument in my CMO network at the minute about, is it brand or is it performance? Like, where do we put the money? And actually, it's neither, it's both, laced with some behavioral science about understanding what the customer actually thinks and feels, because that is illogical. There is no data that will tell you what somebody's heart and mind and perceptions are, because it's really intrinsic for all of us. It's all different. Our perception of brands are all very different. So performance marketing is real top of the funnel numbers. How many people can you get in? Is that the right answer? I'm not sure.
Okay. And then just on that, in terms of, you mentioned that for CMOs, it's really difficult right now because, they're sort of the lowest tenure in the organization. And I did see a really provocative headline that we were talking about earlier, which is, what's the problem with CMOs, which I thought was a bit harsh. But so what are the metrics that are being watched there from a CMO's perspective? And what do you think is really driving the fact that the tenure is so low?
Another massive question, Emma. So I see that there are fundamentally three problems really that are happening in the world of marketing. I think the perception of an organization as to what marketing is very short term focused. It's very tactical. I want a marketeer that can go get me a load of leads. And what they're really not understanding is how you would do that, because like I say, you've got to look at your data of what's happened previously. You've got to understand what's going on with your customer hearts and minds, why they do what they do, why they don't do what they don't do, and then be able to have some creativity and innovation about, well, actually, what do we think we need to do to step away from, and be different. But what they're saying is, just go get me the leads, just go get me people to talk to, and then the sales guys will convert it. But actually, we've got to take some responsibility in marketing for some of this as well, because what we're not doing is saying, well, hang on a second, this is what marketing is. And it's not just about going and getting new leads. It's about the long-termism of the brand and how do we go and get some brand loyalty. What do we need to do? How do we want to serve our customers? How do we understand them? How do we go and talk to them? How do we connect with them? And I think the digital world has removed us from actually having that connection with our customers. And you just look at some organizations that, you know, your favorite brands, and you'll see the difference in different brands of how connected they are to the customer. And you'll see Jaguar. I mean, everybody's been going nuts about Jaguar. A real, you know, separation from history that I'm yet to see and to, you know, make judgment on anything that they've done, because there will be some crazy illogical creativity, innovation about how they want to be different using historical data and talking to customers. So I think there's that, but I think also underpinning all of this, so the organization's perception, marketing not really sort of demonstrating the real true strategic value. But underneath this is that the horrific stat of 28% of marketeers at the moment are qualified or trained. So if you go back to some of the other CXOs that you've interviewed in this series, you know, your CFO will have been, you know, he'll be a chartered something and have a qualification, same as the general counsel. They will be a lawyer. Why are we not expecting this of our marketeers when they're responsible for revenue growth, for that strategic delivery of the business? And so I do think that there's something that we need to start expecting people in strategic leadership marketing roles to have some kind of qualification that says, actually, I've worn the stripes. You know, I got to become a fellow of the CIM because I've demonstrated that I've worked my way up and qualified and invested in that development. But I think people are just coming in saying, I can do social media and I love YouTube and I'm really into AI and all of these amazing tactics. And I think we're blinding organizations with, you know, that tactical delivery, and then it doesn't work, and that's why people are, you know, sort of in and out of an organization, because that is not a long-term way to grow the business.
Yeah, it's interesting though, although, you know, our audience is mostly salespeople, and there's definitely nobody that's qualified to be in any of the jobs that we have, because there aren't any qualifications, or certainly there are some that are coming out now, but certainly most of us are not qualified. Yeah, it's interesting because when we've been talking about in some of the earlier parts of the series, we often talk about talent being, you know, one of the biggest challenges, and that's an interesting spin, just talking about, you know, some of the churn that's going on in marketing teams right now, and then also the accreditations as well. If I can just sort of switch the conversation there a little bit, because it's important for our listeners to hear. So there are some of the challenges that marketing are facing around some of that identity crisis, some of that multiple departments not being pulled together in one strategy, and the talent side of things. But how do salespeople sell into marketing? So, you know, what are CMOs buying? What are they interested in hearing? You know, what advice would you give for salespeople trying to get in to see a CMO?
Well, I think it just goes back to the same principles with marketing. You know, if you want to bring your customers closer and seal the deal, and for them to keep coming back and buying from you, you've got to understand them and you've got to connect with them. So the closer you can get in some real human relationship, and I think steering away from digital, the closest relationships that I've had with any of my partners and suppliers are those that I speak to face, you know, even virtually. I see them and I understand them and they understand me. And so when they see an opportunity to improve my daily work in life, you know, I think of them, they think of me, and we've got that relationship. So I think relationship, and it comes from a lot of curious questions and connection, and just trying, you know, not saying yes to everything either as well. You know, you can say, look, my product doesn't fit for that, and building that credibility and trust so that they're front of mind when the solution is right. I think those are the biggest, and understanding, I think, some of the pressures that marketing teams are under, and CMOs particularly are really under, and how they can add to solve some of those problems. You know, if they've got something that's going to enable those conversations and build their reputation within the organization, I think that, you know, that is definitely a huge opportunity to help CMOs solve.
So I was with a CRO this week. Interesting, you were saying about the personal connections, the building those relationships. I was with a CRO this week who will remain nameless, who said that one of the things that they're particularly struggling with right now is that their salespeople won't go and visit their customers. That it just seems like that's uh, it almost seems like it's just a really difficult conversation right now to get salespeople to actually go out in the field and meet their customers face to face. Having that close relationship, do you have a view on that? I mean, you would sort of imply having a close relationship means meeting somebody face to face, but do you have a view of, selling to CMOs over Zoom versus meeting people face to face?
I think that I would just be asking the question of the customer, what's best for you? Because they will tell you if they don't have time to sit and have a coffee and put the feet up. Different people, we're all different as humans, so regardless of the role, everyone will have their styles and preferences. And I think just ask them, I'd love to come and meet you in person, would you be up for that? If not, should we do Zoom? And let them decide. I think as the relationship goes on, that will change as well. Most people would just say, just get on a Zoom, it's quick, we're on, we're off. But I think once you are established with that CMO, they will want to spend time with you, and they will want to co-create and solve problems with you if they trust you.
That's great. I mean, we would always recommend, if you can, going to see somebody face to face, just because you'll just generally get more time. But just being careful how you ask for it, because we have I personally have a big bee in my bonnet about asking people about a coffee, because that's a very expensive coffee for a lot of C-suite people. So if
Yeah.
anybody's got any questions for Emma, if you'd like to put them in the chat. Oh, and they're coming in thick and fast now. So let's see if I can get through some of these. So some questions from our audience today then. Um, Lauren has asked a question around how does the CMO get involved in the purchase of tech for the wider organization? If I might just slightly change that question, because I'm also thinking there's probably a couple of things in there. How do you get involved in things that you're on the periphery of? But also, I'm also thinking about shadow IT as well, because in most large organizations, if you think when you were in pharma, I imagine you had a CIO that was purchasing on your behalf as well. So it would be great to see to talk a little bit about both sides, about how you got involved when you were the customer, not the buyer, but maybe also when you were on the periphery.
So yeah, you're right. If you're in an enterprise, you've got a CIO who does all of that, and then they tell you, and 50% of people love it, 50% of people hate it. That's just the way that it goes. But I think if you're selling into small markets, for the CMO particularly, my responsibility would be around buying the marketing tech stack. So I would have a huge influence on that. And I would work with either, if there is a CIO or a CISO or the CEO, or sometimes even the COO, sometimes even the CFO, it all depends, because there's the budget, there's also the the data security element. So I do think that understanding that stakeholder map within each business as to who's buying, who's influencing, who's got the budget can be very different. So if you don't succeed with me for IT, you might succeed elsewhere, and those conversations happen at board level and sometimes out of board level. Just in get-togethers and discussions, and we're thinking about this tech. What do you think? So I think it is. I think it will depend, but definitely at an enterprise level, it wouldn't be my decision. And even if I wanted to bring a marketing product in, tech product in, I would have to go and make sure that it was tested, and that all of my colleagues were approving, which is why it takes so long.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's great. And yeah, it's interesting that you brought the CISO in there as well, because I think often that we forget that in a lot of cases with marketing, I used to work for Ping Identity, so I know a little bit about this, but from a customer marketing perspective, we are collecting data about our customers, whether that's specific data about personal identifiable information, or actually it's the data on behavior in the very beginning. So actually the CISO is very involved in marketing tech spend, just because of the way that data is collected and way that it's stored and what that type of data is. So yeah,
and actually more so now in the view of AI, because the cyber threats are just changing every day. there's something like 200 attacks on businesses every day. And, if you don't have that wall, so you could have the best marketing tech stack, but actually, if it's not approved by CISO, they're getting more and more involved in this now because it's such a threat to businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found it very curious when I was at Ping that we talked a lot about um, collecting data of customers before you even were able to identify the customer. So, which is a slightly scary situation as well. No, yeah. So just thinking about some of those different job titles. So just a word to the salespeople listening. So thinking when you're thinking about marketing, thinking about the CIO, but also bringing the CISO into that as well. Question that we've got as well, which is, have you got an example of how a supplier that you've never worked with before got into your diary or got you to engage? So have you got a great salesperson story that managed to maybe say something that appealed to you that you then engaged with them?
I think I might have told you this story before. So I was supposed to go to a CMO event and I couldn't because my cat was poorly. He just took a bit of a turn for the worse. And so I just said to them really honestly, look, I can't make this event. My cat's poorly. And within 3 days, they'd sent me a present for the cat and said, hope to see you again soon. Let us know when you're up for a chat. I booked in for a chat because I thought, wow, that is pretty special because it was about me and my needs, and they were not too bothered that I wasn't going to this event where they were sponsoring the event, and neither here nor there for me really. But suddenly it became really relevant to me when they personalised that follow up. So that to me was just really stood out, and
Yeah.
the cat loved the gift as well.
Great. And it's always, yeah, nice that it was a nice gift. Jen, one of our coaches, is on. She'll love that story because she has a cat that rules their life in their house. So they would absolutely resonate with them for sure. That's great. Um, a couple of yeah, Jen said she's smiling now. That's great. Um, so we've had another question, which is do you think there's a bit of an irony around marketeers that perhaps they've become a little bit immune to some of the tactics that they're cooking up in terms of creativity and getting into people's diaries? And what any views on that?
I think you can spot it a mile off. The biggest bugbear that I think marketers have is the inbox on LinkedIn. It just doesn't work because we're one step ahead and we know how these kind of technologies work and don't work, and the impersonalization of that. So yes, I think that marketeers are the worst culprits for being totally desensitized, which again is why I feel really strongly that that human connection and personalization and getting in front of somebody with something that is really relevant to them works way better. So I think if you had 3 messages that were totally personalized to that CMO rather than 100 same old, you'll go way further.
Yeah, and my experience of having a marketing department under me as well is I certainly saw that with some of the department that I had, and also because I feel like they were often very much dismissed as not people that were important to key decisions around things like pipeline and revenue, those types of things. But actually, that was a bit of a misstep by some salespeople because actually my CMO was very key to those decisions that we were making. So I think it's important, again, like you say, make sure you understand who the people are, but also be relevant with your messaging. Go to them with something that's interesting. That's great.
Yeah, I think add value to their life, because often the ones where you can give a little bit of insight knowledge for free, then they will come to rely on you or look to you for that. Because if you can do some of the thinking for them, because they don't have time to often think themselves, that will put you, 2 steps ahead of the competition.
No, that's great. Absolutely. Yeah. So just going to that point then about doing something that's for them. Just I'm going to combine a couple of questions that have come through as a sort of final question. Are there places or resources or events that you would recommend that salespeople go and look at, where marketing go and get their development from? So are there places where you personally go to get your development from? You think, well, actually, if salespeople were to understand, hang out, use those resources, that actually that would really help them in understanding their client?
I think that there are different or there are different communities for CMOs depending on the industry or the size of the organization. But I actually think that CMOs get way more from their own little WhatsApp communities. Like, I always go every day, probably 5 times a day. There's great chats, really good insight and advice in our WhatsApp group for the CMO circle. But if I were going to say for something that's a bit more external, I think Marketing Week, a lot of people, will always refer to Marketing Week, Marketing Festival for events. But I would really drill into the industry that you're in as well, because marketeers will tend to have like a subgroup. But I think if you can get into the communities, maybe sponsoring events for them, that's where I've seen people have the most traction when we have our CMO network events, like 200 of us get together. I mean, obviously not all 200 will go. You get time with us in a smaller, more intimate environment than those big events.
Yeah, that's great. And actually very much resonates with what Laura Mayer said, who was the CIO that we interviewed at the very beginning of the series, because she talked about referrals were the most powerful way to get in her diary. Her community was a very powerful way to get in her diary. So actually sponsoring those events would make a big difference.
Yeah, and we've actually now got a Notion board. So, same questions get asked. Do you know somebody that can do this? Do you know someone that can do that? Do you know a product that can do this? And we've now got a Notion board to save the, 1,000 same questions.
And
So
also
we just refer to the board, get on the board.
stop distracting from the school WhatsApp, which is clearly going at 200 messages a day.
I
Probably
archive that.
an hour actually for the school chat. Anyway, unfortunately we're out of time. So thank you everybody for asking your questions today. Great to see the interaction there. And thanks very much to Emma for your insights today. Really interesting to hear about CMO. I mean, I'm amazed how, I've been doing this for quite a while and I've learned something. I've learned lots of things actually on all of these webinars that we've done this series, but really interesting to hear about the CMO. So thanks very much for joining us today. Great. So that's the end of our persona series for the autumn. So all that's left is to wish everybody happy holidays, and we'll see you all in January. So as I mentioned, the first webinar we'll be doing when we come back is going to be 2 o'clock on Friday the 10th, and that'll be about pipeline generation planning. So make sure that you're around for that. And all of these recordings are available on the platform, and the extended recordings as well with all of our guests. So thanks very much, and we'll see you all in the new year.